Are we live yet, Chloe?
Yes.
Okay.
Chloe, we ready?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to welcome everyone to the City of Charleston special meeting of June the 9th, 2021. This meeting is to go over the city plan. We'll hear from staff, detail to make a presentation, and then we'll have public information, public questions, and we'll have then we'll close the public aspect of that, and the commission members will discuss and make any motions. I'd like to point out that the commission members are volunteers appointed by Charleston City Council. And you join me in thanking them for their time and their work on behalf of our great city. The commission members are Mr. Jimmy Bailey, Ms. Laquita Bryant Jenkins, Ms. Erica Harrison, Ms. Donna Jacobs, Ms. Angie Johnson, Ms. Sunday Lempesis, Mr. Sean Flug, who I don't think is with us here today, and Mr. Harry Lassane, who's the vice chairman, and my name's Charlie Karras, the chairman. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Morgan, I believe, and he'll turn it over to the appropriate. Christopher, will you introduce any staff members that could be presenting and then go ahead into the presentation?
Absolutely. And that's a good segue to say that I just want to take a second here and recognize this fantastic staff I work with. And I want you all to know they wrote this plan that you all are going to see tonight. Now, we had some consultants help us with background, but these folks wrote this plan. I'm going to read their names. You've heard them many times. I just want to read them because I want everybody to understand that this is a fantastic document they put together. Philip Overcash, Eric Pullman, Chloe Stuber, and Jim Hemphill have put this document together, and it's phenomenal. And they have done so much work on this and should really be commended. I think it's the biggest planning division project that we've ever had that I've been in the city, and they have pulled it all together. So hats off to them.
Christopher, I apologize. I should have said that at the beginning, and thanks staff for their endless hours, days, weeks of work. And just correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is every 10 years. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry to interrupt you. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. No problem. But yeah, so really appreciate all their hard work. What we're going to do tonight, since, you know, at your last meeting, we went through the plan in more detail, is we have the newest graphic version loaded that is out. Again, this is not changing text or items other than things that are in boxes that we will highlight and explain. And these are changes that are based on your comments at the last meeting. But, you know, 99.9% of the document has not changed. We are just getting better graphics as we get it more refined and edit. And it's in almost, you know, complete printable form now. But we, you know, wanted to leave it obviously with the ability to make other changes if you all have other changes you would like to see as you discussed tonight. So we will go through all that, but my staff is here if there are questions in particular sections that they worked on. Last time I filled in for Eric, who was on vacation, and I probably did not do as thorough a job on his sections, but he can certainly answer questions on his sections too that might come up, and that's what we will do tonight. So I'm going to go to the screen share and get this thing going. Let's see, where is my document? Oh, now I'm not finding it. Hold on one second. Let me check something here. I'll be right back. Let's see, where did it go? Here we go. Okay. Back to screen share. Where is it? Why am I not seeing this document? Okay. Do you all see City of Charleston Planning Commission? Is that filling the whole screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, actually, let's see, full screen mode. Now it's black on either side, correct? Great. Okay,
Yes, sir.
get my technology going here. So this is our agenda for tonight. So we're going to go into the document, and it's important to note again, as I was saying, everything that's in a red box we will highlight and talk about. These are substantive revisions since the May 26th special planning commission meeting. So, and if this thing wants to start advancing for me, let's see. There we go. So this is our cover document. This is our cover sheet. Here we go. I will note that we have put a caveat, and this relates to some of the letters and comments you all had received in the past about, this plan. We have this note on the left here that says nothing in the comprehensive plan amends, modifies, suspends, terminates, or abrogates any right which has vested prior to the adoption of the city comprehensive plan, the comprehensive plan by city council, including without limitations, any development rights vested under development agreements adopted by the city prior to adoption of the comprehensive plan, nor does the comprehensive plan create or extend any such rights. So that is from our attorneys to just make it very clear that this plan does not take away PUDs, it does not take away existing zoning, it does not take away development agreements, anything like that. So I know that that had been a little bit of a question in the last go round. So we're going to kind of start scrolling through here. Again, I'm happy to stop at anything that comes up, but I'm going to focus on the changes we've had. We, of course, talk about the other plans that are part of this. That's very important to remember that there are a lot of other plans that are going to be included as appendixes to this plan, including, when it is finished, our One Charleston Parks and Recreation Plan. The key principles of that are going to be discussed tomorrow night. I'm involved in that process and we'll be listening in on those. And so I guess later this summer, that plan will be adopted. We already have our climate action plan that's been adopted, and our vulnerability assessment and housing for fair Charleston. And these kind of go down chronologically, but these are all things that are included by reference in this plan. And it's also important to remember the 4 principles that we have that guide this entire plan. Now, I know we went through this last time, but I think it's important to mention again that this plan is all about having the water first. It's all about having the best data available to understand our challenges. It's all about keeping our strength and diversity. And we want to protect our city's historic diversity via this document. And it's all about being community empowered and asking all members of our community to be a partner of this process. Just moving forward here, this is background on the community engagement, which we discussed in detail last time. And skipping along, population, we discussed a good bit on that. No changes here. Of course, with the new census, we'll have that data later this year. And we will certainly check everything that's in this document, but we feel like we've got a pretty good handle on what the numbers are and things like that, based on our population projections and also data that's already been released by the census. So there's all this, our income numbers. I know we've had in some community engagement, we had some questions about some of those income numbers, but these are from the American Community Survey, US Census Bureau. These are federal numbers that are done for each jurisdiction in the country. And that is the database that's used to determine, affordable housing and things like that from these figures. So on into our natural resources section. And again, no changes in this area. All right, so we have added a part about the UGB and this is based on some comments we've received. And so I'll just kind of go through this little box here. Many sections of the UGB are already well protected by parklands, designated conservation areas, or undevelopable natural features. To maintain the integrity of the full UGB, land conservation efforts should focus along the Brownswood Road corridor, that's on Johns Island, south of Cane Slash and Plowground Roads on Johns Island, and also along southern parts of Folly Road on James Island, and areas adjacent to the UGB in West Ashley and the Wando area on the Cainhoy Peninsula. And we have existing natural or preserved areas that protect our UGB, and these would be the Bulow County Park. And I'll kind of show where this is on this map. The Bulow County Park is over in this area in West Ashley. The Rantles Creek and adjacent wetlands, which are all out in here again on this edge of the urban growth boundary. The Francis Marion Forest, which is up in this area here and protecting in that area. So those are some things that we already have. And then of course, we've got the new PRC park that will be built in this area out here. And then there are some protected areas along the UGB on Johns Island, but not as many. And that's why we've called out those specific areas that may be in need of more protection. Okay, just kind of scrolling through here. So that's the natural resources section. Then our cultural resources section. Okay, I have a few changes in here. This one section, it talks about how Charleston contains many areas that are historically and culturally important. The protection, enhancement, and preservation of properties and areas of cultural and archaeological significance is critical to preserving Charleston's unique sense of place. And then we have a little message from the preservation plan about how it recognized the archaeological significance of Charleston and the educational value and benefit to identifying and understanding archaeological resources related to various historic time periods, diverse cultures, historically marginalized groups, and various socioeconomic contexts. The city has studied the potential for an archaeological ordinance that would provide preservation standards to protect archaeological resources. Such an ordinance has been studied, but would require additional staff and resources to implement. So we have that mentioned there. And on through this document, this is, I think this may be the first time that we've seen this in one of your meetings. It was in your packet that you got over the weekend, but this is all of our settlement areas on one map now. Of course, these boundaries are subject to change. It's certainly nothing that's firm. It's just based on the research we were able to do in the context of this document, but we're going to continue to work on these and further refine these. But again, this is the first time ever we've included these in a city plan, and we are really proud to have these and think it's very important that they be brought forward. So that's cultural resources. Then in economic development, we looked at all these charts in your last discussion. All our wage stats, our regional cost of living. So just kind of zipping through here. Then in our transportation area, we've refined some of these maps a little bit to make them easier to read. So I'll show you some of these. This is just different improvements that are slated that will happen hopefully within the time period of this plan, and areas that have been studied and are either underway or soon to be underway for improvements. And these are all in the citywide transportation plan as well. And of course, we have our pedestrian bicycle aspects that are covered by the citywide transportation plan. And these are all in the appendix as well. Then we do highlight this because this is a completely new image that is coming out from the Low Country Low Line. It's in their documents and their kind of concept plan that has been approved by the city, but we wanted to include it in here because this is something that's happened over the last couple of years. It's a new addition to the city. This is some more info on the Low Country Rapid Transit, which has been evolving and is now a refined route. And what you see on the right, of course, are quarter-mile radiuses from these key stops of the Low Country Rapid Transit, and how we're going to be studying those in more detail and making sure that they are as transit-oriented for development as possible as time goes by. And then our potential commuter ferry service terminals, we don't have the routes yet. These are just locations that have access, that have potentially public access to the water in areas that potentially could be navigable by water taxis of certain types. So there definitely are some ways that we could get around. We think there definitely, as the roads continue to get congested, will be places that you could get around faster by water than you could by road. In the transportation recommendations, we had one little addition here to add the phrase, connect more schools and job centers to neighborhoods with pedestrian pathways and multi-use pathways, and expand opportunities for bike share systems. So that was a quick little edit. So into our community facilities and priority investment area. And you've seen all this before. We do have all our completed projects from 2015 to 2019 on a nice, neat little chart. You can see what kind of money the city has been spending, which is a tremendous amount on all these projects. About $318 million to be exact over the last 5 years on capital projects. And then our capital improvement plan for the next few years, which is coming up. And what that sum total is of $492 million. So definitely a lot of things going on from a physical infrastructure construction standpoint. And our recommendations in that area. And then into the housing area, which we've talked a good bit about over the past 6 to 9 months. We do point out that the 2020 Housing for a Fair Charleston report outlines an affordable housing framework plan in Charleston, complete with policy and programming tools to address the affordable housing crisis. City plan housing element builds on the research presented in that previous report and provides additional recommendations based on additional findings from the city plan housing analysis and community housing labs. So that's kind of differentiating, what the Housing for Fair Charleston report is. And of course, that's included as part of the plans and studies that are part of our dictionary. Our appendix.
Can you call out page numbers, please?
Okay, this is, I was just alerted, I should probably call out page number. So this is on page 90, this recent change here. Okay, moving along. These are all graphics you've seen. So on page 97, we're gonna we've added this little section about managing growth, and I'll read off what we're adding. It says, during engagement activities, many people expressed a love for the diversity of their communities and concerns about the loss of that diversity as housing becomes increasingly unattainable for most. There was a resounding call for there to be a mixture of housing that meets the needs of all income levels, life stages, and household size, and for more housing to be located close to where people work. On the same token, many of the same community members expressed deep concerns with additional growth and a desire to slow or stop new development, especially given the pressures of flooding, sea level rise, and traffic. Though these concerns are wholly reasonable and warranted, shutting the door on additional growth would have detrimental impacts on an already dire affordability crisis in multiple ways. And then over to the next page, page 98. So these are the impacts of the no growth approach. And I know several planning commissioners asked that we look into this, and staff has researched this and had discussions. And so these are what we think are the impacts of a no growth approach, which is again, not recommended by this plan. But a no growth approach would, in reference to housing affordability, would halt the creation of new affordable housing and also restrict the overall supply further, and that would further drive home and land values upwards. Our local business and job growth, we would have local job creation and economic growth would be hindered by a no growth approach, especially for businesses already struggling to find employees due to lack of affordable housing stock. From a quality and reliable public transit standpoint, our public transit systems rely heavily on ridership. Lack of density along transit corridors can threaten the viability of existing and future transit. For instance, we're trying to increase densities along that Low Country Rapid Transit line to make sure it is successful. Density is key to success of transit. So if you couldn't grow further, then you would potentially jeopardize the success of that new transit route. We should also note that a no growth approach would also would have substantial implications for current rights of private property owners citywide, folks who may have undeveloped land or marginally developed land who have entitlements via current zoning and things like that. So we wouldn't want to see their development rights limited. Future planning decisions and actions must weigh all of these factors in balance. To create a more resilient and equitable city, growth must be managed in a way that increases affordability, supports a healthy local economy, improves transportation options, preserves the natural and cultural resources that make our city unique, protects all of its community members from flooding and natural disasters. So this has been our effort at refining what the implications of a kind of no growth approach would be. Happy to answer questions on that, or we can.
Yeah, commission members, I know that we talked about that a good bit at the last meeting, which was important for us to talk about. You think that's strong enough, the content or the education component? Harry, I thought you were going to say.
Well, I especially like that last 2 or 3 sentences. And to me, that sort of encapsulates the entire plan. That kind of touches on everything. So if there's a way to highlight that or amplify it some way, but I think, again, this is a document that we will be referring to over the next 10 years and perhaps beyond. So, the fact that it's in here and we know it's on page 98 now, I think that's sufficient to to deliver the message that we want. But I'm curious to hear what the other commissioners think.
Other commission members?
Charlie, I think that I was the one that asked that at least this be considered to be put in here, and I happen to agree with what has been written, but I think it's important to make sure that the commission agrees with this. I mean, this happens to represent my opinion, and I'm glad I've already written down page 98 as well, because I want to be able to refer to it. But there ought to be a debate on this if someone disagrees.
I agree. Other commission members? Anyone?
I mean, I'll just say in response to that, if nobody else will, that I agree with Jimmy 100%. And I think that's what, again, that's what we're here to do tonight, is to debate this plan. And if we don't like parts of it, now's our opportunity to change it, to amend it, and then to forward it on to city council. So by passing this, we're saying we agree with that statement. And I'm so pleased that Mr. Bailey made this comment last time at our last meeting, because at the end of the day, this is what we do. And I think, again, that those last few sentences really encapsulate the way I think about my service on this commission. And that's, whoever wrote that did a really nice job, I think, because those are our goals and that's what we try to do. And, if we believe, as I do, in the conservation of our rural areas, then the only way to keep sprawl and development from continuing to just spill out into those areas, we have to develop the areas of our region and our city where the infrastructure already exists. And I know it's traffic concerns and other concerns that people have about development are real, and they're not. I don't belittle or believe that those are not legitimate concerns, but at the end of the day, we're trying to do those things in those last couple of sentences. So I commend Mr. Bailey for bringing this up, and I think this commission needs to weigh in on this.
I agree with both of you, and I'm also glad Mr. Bailey brought it up. We hear it every day. This is an educational component of this, as far as I'm concerned, that we address it and say it is an issue and that we address it. Other commission members? Ms. Lampasas, were you going to say something? I don't want to.
Yes, Charlie, thank you. No, I agree with what Harry and Mr. Bailey have mentioned. I think that we need to be very careful about affordability for not even in the affordable housing group, but also the workforce housing and being able to live and work in Charleston. That is something that is not happening now. And that's a great way to stop the sprawl and the traffic and the deterioration of our roads. And we need to really identify, I mean, we've kind of been, zoned in the dark a little bit over the last several, really since I've been on the commission. And, we've done things, we've done things to the zoning ordinances that have allowed things at the time because they were needed during the recession and during different time frames. But I think that we need a broad understanding, and I think this does a really good job. No growth is not acceptable. I mean, you can't grow. Your city cannot go forward if you don't grow. And, we just have to manage that growth and find different housing opportunities that will then enforce the business opportunities. And if we don't, and also the entitlement process, the longer it takes to approve anything, the more costly it becomes. I've always wanted commission members to actually fill in an application for a development or for just a subdivision, a small subdivision, to get an idea of what that entails and how much money is spent and what's required. And I think that if we all had a good sense of what we are asking, the people that come before us to do, and not just knee jerk with one item that's really a bad subdivision that was approved or a flooding issue. All those are issues that are extremely important. And this document hopefully will lead us in the right direction, but we need to do it in a way that's not vague, that people know what we need to do, and it's really printed and understandable to everybody involved. I think that, we've had a lot of vague mentions in this document, which is one of my concerns. But as you said, Christopher, it doesn't, people that already have opportunities going, are already grandfathered in. And I don't want this document to be something that stops people from doing things. I want us to take into consideration the roads, the traffic, the schools, and living in the area that we work. And I drive in I-26 coming home in West Ashley, and I see the traffic going out to Monk's Corner and to Somerville, and understand that it's a lot of the health community, but it would drive me crazy to actually drive that every day. And we need more people in the city of Charleston. People, they shy away from doing business in the city of Charleston these days. And I actually had the opportunity to go downtown over the weekend, and I just walked around just from an objective standpoint to see what I thought. And I have some concerns. The shuttered buildings are a concern. There was a statement from our package where somebody says that nobody in downtown Charleston is from Charleston. That makes me very sad. And I hope that this document that we're working on for our 10-year plan will bring more people living in the city of Charleston, more people wanting to do business in the city of Charleston, and do it in a way that is thoughtful to the environment, to where I was born and raised, and want to continue to live in a good environment. And I hope that that's what this document does going forward. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Ms. Lampasas. Other commission members?
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to applaud Mr. Bailey for bringing forward this idea. If you go where Harry likes to say sometimes a 3,000 or 30,000 view, this is a comprehensive plan for how we want our city to look in the future. And if we don't address the good stuff that we want to see, more trees or more parks, with the hard stuff, then we won't come to the end to a good document. And one of the elements that we were required to add to our document was resilience. We chose to add equity in that. And those are very important for exactly this no growth approach. If we're going to be resilient, we have to welcome people into the community. If we're going to have economic development, we're welcoming people into the community. But how do we do that in a very thoughtful, respectful way that we like the way our city looks in 10 or 20 years? And that's our charge tonight. And I think it was very important to have this included in the plan. And I just wanted to add my 2 cents because I want people to hear us agree or not disagree with this thought process. So I'm just echoing my other commission members' thoughts, but I wanted to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Any other commission members? And I think, part of this is a big part, as Mr. Bailey brought up last meeting. We got to educate the public, and this is the education component, because we all hear it, and we need to let people know that we hear it, we understand it, but we want them to understand the facts. And I think this being addressed is very important. Other commission members, Ms. Harrison, did you have your hand up? I don't want.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I just do want to commend Mr. Bailey for bringing this forward, because you are right. We do have to interface with the public. And I think this is such a good statement inside our comprehensive plan, that bringing it to the forefront as we go forward with applications, that is almost like a little bit a mini primer. If this is something, in terms of public comments that we receive, because it is a lot of knee-jerk reactions, you know, in information and the way information is disseminated. You know, we've watched how it's, you know, you go from being in a neighborhood association to being on Facebook to being a tweet, you know, so, you know, a lot of these projects become influenced by 140 characters. And I think this is a good way to kind of bring temperature down on issues that deal with a lot of our planning decisions, but also as a way of kind of forward facing, saying we don't want that a no growth approach. This is the impact, and this is how we try to approach planning in a very sensitive way.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. I appreciate it. Anyone else? If not, we'll move forward. And again, I think we all agree with Mr. Bailey and thank him for bringing this up last time. And I think I've read the article in Post and Courier. Hopefully they're understanding we're trying to educate people and move a smart growth, not no growth, smart growth. But anyway, if no one else has a comment, Mr. Morgan, we'll move forward.
Okay. All right. So now into the land use section, and we discussed all this before. This is all the same as what you all have seen. The different districts of the city, or the land use districts of the plan. I should add in reference to this, because this has come up over the last couple of weeks, it's important for everybody to understand that when we have these different districts, that just because it may say suburban edge or suburban or campus or something like that, doesn't mean that you couldn't have a mixture of uses in these areas. It's just about the level of intensity. So obviously a commercial use in a suburban area would be more intense than a commercial use in a suburban edge area in number of square feet and, you know, traffic impact, things like that. So it's important that everybody understand that all these districts do allow for a range of uses, offices, things like that. It's just the level of intensity within them. And of course, these are just recommendations. This is not zoning. These will then influence, you know, what zoning districts we put in what areas of the city if there are requests made. So just wanted to bring that up. So we have, the maps are getting a little bit more refined. We aren't changing the recommendations anywhere from what you all have seen before, but just trying to make them a little bit clearer to read. We have all these percentages. We're going to work to get those numbers on the final image, but I'll show you for citywide what all those numbers are in just a second. But as we have the final document, it will have future percentages in each area of the city, like future percentages of these categories in the downtown. We have these figures for you right now. We showed them on a chart last time. We're just going to put them in a graphic form. So again, Inner West Ashley, and should also point out that each of these maps has some of the designation of the African-American settlement areas. And again, this is just scratching the surface on these settlement areas. We need to do more research on them, but this is to alert us as we are working through, if let's say there's a rezoning recommended in an area over here or a planned unit development. Well, depending on its scale and scope, it might be that it's perfectly appropriate given the existing character of this settlement area, or let's just say it's a 500-acre new planned unit development immediately adjacent or within a settlement area. Well, then that may necessitate a full study of that settlement area and the whole character of that settlement area before we can make a recommendation in the affirmative for that type of a planned unit development. So just pointing that out.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Jacobs had a question.
Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
Okay, this is just me being maybe a little dense, but this future land use percentage by area, it's not representing what we see now. It's like what we're going to strive for, or
it's what you see on these maps. So for like Inner West Ashley, what is the amount? Well, it's actually for all of West Ashley, but what are the categories? Like how much of West Ashley is suburban edge, how much of West Ashley is suburban, how much is neighborhood?
I guess I'm caught up with the word future because it suggests that we're going to recommend land be shifting.
Well, all our maps, we call them the future land use maps. So, and this
I
is,
see. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So this is from this land. So what it's saying is it's not necessarily reflecting what the land use is today. In general, that does influence how we make these recommendations. But it's just like there was a lot of discussion. We're going to go into this in just a minute in reference to Cainhoy and the Cainhoy development. You know, these are land use recommendations. These do not change the underlying zoning. They do not change PUDs. They do not change development agreements. But should those property owners choose to change their PUDs or their zoning, we would use this as a guide in making recommendations for those changes.
Thank you.
So, okay. So this is Outer West Ashley and James Island. And again, noting that we are showing this with this alteration of the UGB to follow the boundary lines of the Folly Road overlay, since the Folly Road overlay in both the county and the city jurisdiction has densities and zonings that are not really compatible with being outside the urban growth boundary. So we are showing that here, just pointing that out. That is a change to the UGB.
Okay, I'm going to stick for just a minute. That future land use percentage by area, is that only within the city or within the entire James Island boundary?
It's within our entire planning area, so it's inside the UGB.
Got it. Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
So that's city, county, you know, all that area. Mhm. So lower Cainhoy Peninsula, it's the Daniel Island area, and then upper. So wanted to talk with you all about this for a few minutes. Obviously, we had some contact and some comments at the last meeting from the folks who are associated with the Cainhoy development, which is most of this area in through here and down in here. I hope you can see my cursor. So we had a very good discussion with them yesterday, and you're going to hear from Ms. Smythe, I believe, tonight. She's one of the speakers about that discussion. But essentially, I think they are now comfortable with the discussion because they are understanding about how these land use recommendations are applied. Essentially, this is saying that we, like to see the greatest densities along Clements Ferry Road, not only because this is in the area that our land and water analysis showed as some of the highest land in the area, but also because it has obviously access to transportation, and it is an area that one day could become a bus rapid transit location. So this is the area that we're recommending for essentially city center out here, which is a good bit of density. Then we do have a lot of suburban densities out here as well. And then we feather out to the suburban edge for the northern parts here and suburban edge for the higher elevation areas to the south. Those folks are fully aware of the elevations that are associated with the properties down here and are dealing with that in reference to their own development plans there. So essentially these land use recommendations, in line with what we've been saying throughout the city, that we're focusing development in areas that have greater elevation and trying to keep areas of lower elevation with limited development. By virtue of this area having so much good elevation out here, it is an area that has more suggested density than currently exists in their development plans, in their PUD and in their development agreement. And so it's substantially more. It's about twice as much out in this area, because as you look at the overall city on the previous maps we saw from the land and water sections, this is some of the safest areas in the city because of elevation and lower risk from storm surge, lower risk from tidal influences, things like that. So I think that discussion has made the folks with the Cainhoy development more comfortable with what's in the plan and greater understanding of both sides of what they were looking for. And of course, we have also made it very, very clear that this plan does not change underlying PUDs, does not change development agreements. Of course, it's just recommendations for future activities.
Ms. Jacobs had a question.
Just very quickly, because I want to make sure I continue to have a little problem with these colors. So I want to make sure I understand them correctly. If you take that corridor and you look at the Wando side of the corridor, it looks to me that the color is different than the Cooper River side of the corridor. Am I correct on that? Like on that Wando side next to the suburban edge, that looks suburban to me. And on the other side of the road, it looks past the city center core. It looks neighborhood. Is that correct?
This area versus this area,
Yes, sir.
those are the same. I mean, they are both suburban on here. Then you've got the neighborhood edge here, and then the city center here.
So
And
those are suburban without neighborhood at all, which neighborhood is more dense than suburban, correct?
Correct. And that's really mainly found in the downtown area.
Okay.
You know, in areas like Ansonboro and all, it's comparable densities to Ansonboro.
Okay, I completely understand that. Those three color designations start to get a little loosey-goosey with me. So I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding them when we're interpreting these maps. Thank you.
Yeah, so
Christopher,
this
I want
is
to
all
thank you
suburban.
Christopher, I want to thank you also for bringing that up and addressing it, having that meeting since we discussed it last meeting. You go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to emphasize, yeah, this is suburban edge and it's along the edges of the UGB as much as possible. I mean, there already are some entitlements in this area here that are much more in line with what we call the neighborhood edge here. And then this is city center, which is the most intensive category. And it goes for at least a quarter mile, if not further, from either side of the Clements Ferry Road. And that's in line with, you know, transit recommendations for creating good transit ridership capability. And part of the reason it cuts off in some of these areas is because there are, you know, wetlands in these areas. These are showing some of the wetland areas, not fully delineated, but the best information available. And, you know, that's why that, you know, doesn't go further, but also it doesn't go further because it's not as walkable an area to go to the transit. So the whole idea behind city center is that you're creating walkable city centers, and this would be created as a walkable city center.
Mr. Lasane has his hand raised.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Christopher, for explaining this, and I think you've done a nice job. And I appreciate the concern that was expressed at the last meeting about this planning effort relative to existing development agreements and so forth. And I'm glad we've made this clarification. I also kind of wanted to address the other side of the concerns about the Kainhoy Peninsula, and that is to point out the upper right-hand corner of this map, which shows a very natural area. That is in the federally owned Francis Marion National Forest. And I wonder if there's a way we don't have an urban growth boundary necessarily in Berkeley County, is that correct?
Oh, no, we do. We've
Okay.
adopted one. Berkeley County has not really adopted one, but this was adopted in our last plan, this line, and we're keeping it in the same location. It basically follows the National Forest here, along here, and then it follows the edge of the kind of city limits in this area here.
Excellent, thank you. Maybe in line with Mr. Bailey's comment last week about the no growth argument, if we, and perhaps it is, and I'm just not aware of it, but I would like for this plan to reiterate the importance of and the city's commitment to the urban growth boundaries in the city. Because I think what we discussed just a little while ago and what the language we reviewed a few minutes ago talked about was a balance, that this plan tries to balance growth. And I think that's what the Kainhoy Peninsula is going to require the city to do, and that is balance the growth needs of the city and the fact that this area has infrastructure. It's appropriate for development from a geographical or geological standpoint, I guess, from elevations and so forth. But at the same time, it's very close to natural areas. Not all of that upper right-hand corner is owned by the federal government. You know, there are in holdings in there that are privately owned that could potentially be developed by another jurisdiction, of course. But I do think, the city making an affirmative commitment to the protection of those natural areas and the areas outside the urban growth boundary that are not currently, protected by either public ownership or conservation easement. I think that would be, when I someday go off this commission, that would give me peace of mind about the development and the future growth in the Cainhoy Peninsula.
Thank you, Mr. Sains. Good. I agree with you, and I think they were smart comments. Mr. Morgan, you have anything to say on that?
I think that in our current land use recommendations, I think we're achieving a good bit of that. And then also in the comments that we had earlier in the natural resources area, I believe it is, with the in reference to UGB, I think it helps emphasize that as well.
I was going to say on page 110, because I thought I had read about it in here.
I'll get back to that. We'll go back to that.
It does talk about the urban growth boundary being an essential component of the city plan, future land use maps, and as a land use management strategy. I know it's probably pretty hard to decide what you highlight and what you don't, but it might be buried a little bit. I know in particular on Johns Island, and I was going to make some comments on that later. It's such an important part of the strategy, and I think there has been a pretty strong commitment there. And what Harry points out, I think is, I think would be a very worthy goal.
Christopher, I think it's page 108 now in the newest version.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Other land use
Growth
tools.
boundary, an essential component of the city plan, future land use map, and land use management strategies, the concept of defining edge of the urban and suburban development. And it's been around since 2000, and interjurisdictional coordination is key. And of course, Charleston County has UGB that matches ours, with the exception of on James Island, because they have no UGB on James Island. They have all of James Island, every bit of it, inside the UGB. Yeah. And then Berkeley County is well aware that we have a UGB. They haven't chosen fit at this point in time to have a UGB. However, I think their densities reflect similar densities that we have for inside versus outside the UGB.
Christopher and Mr. Chairman, just to let you know, our chief resilience officer is also on the call today. And I think he would like to say something. So whenever you all wrap up with this discussion and have a chance, let me know and I'll enable his microphone.
I think we're okay now. If he wants to talk on this topic, why don't he pipe him in now?
Mark, whenever you're ready.
Mark, you go ahead.
All right, thank you. And I'm sorry, I just wanted to add my comments that I think the references that you all are talking about how to preserve the natural land will in the future be really important as the climate begins to change, as things begin to change. Being able to preserve these lands for the future is going to be really important, as we see in the city today. Decisions that were made years ago, as things are changing now, we probably would have wished we've done that 30, 40 years ago. So these are great discussions, and I'm glad you're having them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And so I guess, Mr. Morgan, can we, I know we don't want to highlight everything in the plan, but maybe there could be a little more emphasis on there where Mr. Lesane discussed.
Okay. Do you all want to take a look at just the recommendations in the land use section? Let me go back to that. So we're back in there. Let's move on to those so we can see if that is kind of exemplifying some of the things that Mr. Lesane was wanting. So let me move a couple of things around here. Okay. So we have the make the best use of the highest land around the city for residential, commercial, mixed use development, especially areas around our current future public transit corridors, reduce density on the lowest ground, land use strategies for middle ground require additional study. I'm just going to kind of zip through these. Develop proactive measures to educate property owners and potential developers to parcel elevation, areas of known flooding, if underscore responsibility of effective water management, higher ground, encourage use of green water infrastructure, green stormwater infrastructure, limit fill and build construction methods, encourage walkable, efficient neighborhoods, create a new zoning ordinance, support the UGB through land use regulations and incentives, continue coordination with adjacent jurisdictions, and by protecting land outside the UGB via land acquisition, park development, and conservation easements. And then continue to work collaboratively with our member adjoining governments, and continue to improve collaborations with adjoining jurisdictions to make the best use of high ground and limit low-lying areas development. So I see a lot of hands raised, so.
Go ahead, whoever wants to be recognized. I don't see whose hands up first, but whoever.
I believe Ms. Jacobs was next.
Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to support what Harry said. That's why I had asked for that further definition of the UGB early in the document, that it's understood how it's protected, and it's highlighted in some ways. But I think that what Harry might be suggesting is that maybe we need to, whenever we reference the UGB in the plan, we make it bold so that people see that reference on every page, because you make that definition early on, like we talked about last time, and I thought was important to put in there, but every time we use it moving forward, people aren't necessarily going to start on page 1 and read the plan. So maybe just to show if where we refer to the UGB in the plan as a land use tool or a recommendation, that it's just put in bold print so people can see it on the page with reference to that, because I do think it is an important thing. There was a lot of discussion during community engagement about codifying the UGB and protecting the UGB. And I just think it's very important that we make sure that people see it very prominently in the plan, and simply a bold type might be an important thing to do.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Mr. Hussain, did you want to speak?
Yeah, and I Christopher and staff, y'all have done a great job, and I apologize for acting like I'm asking for wholesale revisions. I think what you've done here is nice. I really just wanted to sort of highlight it for this commission in the context of our overall city plan. The UGB was a great achievement for this county and for this city when it was done in the late 90s and in 2000, as you mentioned, Christopher. And I mean, it is a fundamental piece of our land use plan. We're lucky to have it. We owe a great debt to the folks who put it in place. And I wanted to highlight it, and particularly, and I'm glad Mr. Bailey mentioned Johns Island. It's at least as important on Johns Island as it is in the Cainhoy Peninsula. So it's the most important elements of our plan and our planning in this city. It is codified. It is, adopted by city council. So anyway, that was the point of my bringing it up. And I appreciate everyone's comments, and Christopher especially for working to highlight where it is already in the plan.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Anyone else? Anyone else have their hand up? Okay. Christopher, the ball's back in your court.
Okay. All right. We'll keep moving here. Oops. Let me get my cursor back going. We will move on to the resilience and equity areas of the plan. Quick little change here at the bottom of page 128. Resilience was added to the list of required elements in 2020. The Charleston City Plan expands on this requirement by addressing equity and resiliency as interdependent goals. Both resilience and equity are interwoven throughout the plan and summarized in the resilience and equity recommendations matrix. And that's at the end of this chapter. We don't have the page number definitive yet, but it's at the end of this chapter, and we'll show you. And it's much prettier than it was before. The substance is all the same as what you all saw before, but it's a much prettier document now. Moving on through here, we have kind of clarified this earlier map that shows all the things that are going on for barrier protection, where the Corps is looking for their facility, some of the recommendations from Wagner and Ball about other alternative areas that could be studied further, other ways to achieve barrier protection, So this is very, very important going forward because, of course, with the peninsula, we do make the assumption for its land use that there will ultimately be some sort of 12-foot barrier protection around the peninsula itself. Oops, I jumped ahead here more. Okay, so we have, this is kind of an addition that we found through some research that we thought was very important for this section of the document. These are some images from the general city plan map and from the Morris Knowles report from 1931. Of course, the city got lots of accolades for creating, you know, one of the first zoning ordinances and preservation ordinances in 1931, and that is very true. But also behind some of those, particularly from a land use standpoint, were some things that were not as positive, and we have noted this from this map. You'll notice on the legend for this general city plan map, we have use districts, which include white residential district and colored residential district. And we thought it was important to include in this section, you know, idea of how far we have come with these things, these early planning documents that still took so much of race into account, and how we're trying to get away from that past with new documents in the city. Good historic reminder here of the importance of all this. A couple of things that are this is the little section that we've added in. Despite ruling in reference to unconstitutionality of racial zoning, cities continue to consider race in planning practices and decisions. And then we had this 1931 report, which provided blueprints for the city's first zoning regulations. Race-based residential districts were outlined in the plan. So just noting that that is something from the past, something certainly that has not been part of any plans for many, many, many decades, but was part of past planning history. And then we have another recommendation here on our equity and resilience recommendations, and that is to prioritize city plan recommendations that advance resilience and equity, including the resilience and equity recommendations matrix. And then we will move on to that matrix. And this is the matrix here. And it has all the areas, the different reports and studies that may cite them, such as climate action plan, the sea level rise strategy, all hazards, vulnerability and risk assessment, state of racial disparities in Charleston County, Dutch dialogues, land and water analysis, health and all policies, and citywide transportation plan. And I should point out, we've had a lot of communication with our health and wellness committee at the city and are trying to best include health and all policies in this document. Sometimes they may not be as, you know, specifically called out, such as, you know, creating walkable neighborhoods and parks within easy walking distance of all new housing. But we think it is very important that these health policies are a key part of our thought pattern in our planning. So we will move on from there. And then we go to the appendix that has all the plans that are part of this and other supplementary data that we used in the document. And then our glossary of key terms, which are throughout the document. I think that's the first ever that we've done a glossary of terms like that. And there you have the document. So I'm going to stop the screen share here and then open it up back to you all for discussion. We can certainly go back to any pages that you all have questions about.
Well, probably what I'd like to do is, since it's a public hearing, we're going to have more discussion amongst council, amongst planning members, but we have some people who signed up to speak. So Chloe, why don't we let them go ahead one by one? I think you have Ms. Drolet. Is she available?
Mr. Lay had to sign off, so we're going to go next to Anna Catherine Carroll.
Okay.
And we should add that we do have the letter from Mr. Olay. So you all have that. Yes.
Yeah, I can read that when we get to the written comments.
Thank you. Ms. Carroll, you go ahead.
Thank you. This is Anna Catherine Carroll with the Preservation Society of Charleston. And the Preservation Society really appreciates the opportunity to comment on the draft city plan. And we are highly encouraged by planning staff's incorporation of several recommendations that we asked the city to pursue in earlier stages of review. Really appreciate your collaborative and transparent process. But in particular, we appreciate the strengthening of the cultural resources, housing, and economic development elements, and greater prioritization of preserving our city's unique historic environment and sense of place. However, at this point, we do feel there is room for improvement in several areas, and we respectfully request the Planning Commission's consideration of the following. First, we feel that greater attention should be given to promoting improved tourism management. Affordable housing, neighborhood serving businesses, and quality of life all depend on a comprehensive approach to tourism management, and we feel the final plan must put forth a bolder vision for livability in Charleston. Second, we noted that the latest draft plan omits an initial recommendation to create an Office of Economic Development, and this is something that we would urge the city to reincorporate. It is clear that Charleston needs an economic development office to establish vision and proactively shape economic growth that meets our city's current needs. Lastly, to more meaningfully promote improved shared green space, we also feel the city should bolster goals stated in the plan to create more public green space by requiring greater contributions to the public realm from new developments. And we thank you for considering our position, and congratulations on making it this far in the planning process.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll, and thank you for the work of your organization and your input as well. Is Ms. LaForce next, Chloe?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. You go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'm Betsy LaForce with the Coastal Conservation League. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. We also would like to reiterate our appreciations to the city planning staff and consultants for their great work to engage the public and meaningfully incorporate that feedback into the draft city plan before you. The city plan team has been incredibly receptive to the comments the league has submitted throughout this process, and they've put in a lot of work to incorporate many of our recommendations into the draft. As we enter the final phases of engagement and approvals, we'd like to continue to highlight opportunities we see to strengthen elements of the plan. At the last meeting, we mentioned the importance of removing transportation recommendations related to the I-526 extension, and that still holds, but we wanted to focus tonight on points related to Cainhoy, which reflect the productive discussion you all had around page 98, the importance of managing growth responsibly in a way that's resilient, equitable, and thoughtful to the environment, understanding that a no-growth approach isn't realistic, and how we need to print those guidelines clearly in the plan to make it understandable for all involved. Special thanks to Commissioner Lesane for his comments around the need for balancing development and protecting the critical natural resources on the northern portion of Cainhoy. Cainhoy is the largest remaining undeveloped area within the city of Charleston. It's also contains some of the highest ground in the city, as we heard tonight. This presents a unique opportunity to commit to the recommendations from the Dutch dialogues, not only by applying the water first principle of avoiding development in low-lying areas, but also by conserving ecological and cultural resources and considering their role in maintaining the overall health of a site and its surroundings before planning decisions are made. The good news is that we know the population growth that's projected for Cainhoy can happen responsibly by concentrating the development along the Clements Ferry Road corridor in the city center. And as we heard confirmed at the last Planning Commission meeting, the proposed density for Cainhoy can be achieved by concentrating growth along this corridor where infrastructure already exists. This approach would protect against flooding risks on the southern portion that's highly susceptible to inundation from sea level rise, and help protect the critical longleaf pine habitat on the northern portion, the largest of such ecosystems found anywhere within the city of Charleston's jurisdiction, which notably is home to many threatened and endangered wildlife species that rely on that rare ecosystem in order to survive, such as red-cockaded woodpeckers, flatwood salamanders, and bald eagles, to name a few. Further, the northern portion of Cainhoy is also the location of irreplaceable cultural resources dating back millennia alongside the incredibly significant Jack Primus and UG settlement communities, which are facing immense development pressure by industrial and suburban growth. We believe growing responsibly means supporting a mutually beneficial relationship between the people of a community and its cultural and natural resources, as stated in the plan. To this end, alternative designs for reducing harm on cultural and natural resources should be encouraged by adjusting the future land use map designations for the northern portion of the Kainhoy Peninsula from suburban and suburban edge designations to entirely rural outside of the proposed city center area to manage the level of intensity and impacts in this highly sensitive area. Specific density recommendations would be beneficial to define true future land uses for this area. Densities of 1 dwelling unit per 3 acres to clusters of 1 dwelling unit per acre could be considered. As we learned at the last Special Planning Commission meeting, making these necessary adjustments for Kainhoy is challenging, considering the development plans that were approved in 2014. And as was discussed at the end of that meeting, those development plans are no longer consistent with the realities we're faced with today. 10 new years of information and data around the implications of sea level rise have rightfully influenced the city to adopt a new planning paradigm rooted in resilience. However, several of the PUDs that were approved prior to 2015 in the city feature entitlements and land plans that do not reflect this new approach. To address this challenge, the Conservation League encourages the city to include guidelines in the city plan around maintaining the validity of development approvals. This would give the city the right to review a concept plan approved as part of a PUD when no building permits have been issued in a period of 5 years, and the right to choose not to issue further permits within a PUD until a revised concept plan has been approved that addresses necessary changes that need to be made. Thank you for your consideration of these comments. We look forward to remaining engaged in this process leading up to council adoption of the city plan.
Thank you, Ms. LaForce, for your time and for your comments today. Next, I believe we have Councilmember Carol Jackson. Councilmember Jackson, whenever you're ready, and thank you for your work as well.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you to everyone who has served so diligently on the commission during this expanded year. I can't say enough about the staff work that's gone on. I've tried to follow along as carefully as I could as one of the members of council who will be receiving your document when it arrives to us and making what we hope are wise and future forward decisions. Tonight, I'm really just appealing to you for one particular change from the draft document that you have in front of you. And when I thought about how I was going to approach this, I was going to say, I apologize for making it such a small request in the shadow of the monumental recommendations that you've been working on, and especially the unique thinking that you've been doing over resilience and equity and all those important topics that are now firmly ensconced in this plan. So my topic is the UGB boundary on James Island. I don't think it's any surprise to Mr. Morgan and Mr. Hemphill in particular, who are sort of my soldiers in planning for James Island. And I would ask that you not accept the recommendation to move the UGB to the west side of Folly Road. I know that there are, logical reasons why that recommendation has been made to you. For certain, there's one large housing typical subdivision, suburban subdivision, which is now outside the UGB, and with this change, you would be putting it inside. That subdivision was approved before the 2000 UGB line was established. And then the other anomaly that I think everyone probably would never decide again is a multifamily rental property that resides right on the corner of Brimble Extended and Folly Road, the Spyglass Apartments. And so, but the other portions of land that are currently protected by the current boundary of the James Island UGB are really the poster children of what you all are talking about and making more of an effort to balance typical former rural lands from the development that we are encouraging on high-drying connected transit corridors. If you look carefully at the James Island future land use map, the areas that you would be taking away from the UGB boundary are African-American settlement communities that are east of Folly Road. And they also have a lot of family properties. Not many people farm there any longer. That's very true. But that was their heritage. That is the way the land topographically is the most useful. If you look more closely at that map, you see a ton of spiderweb tidal creeks all running east to west. And that area floods, very often, and it's pretty much absorbent at this point in time. But you would be shining a bigger spotlight. There is already a lot of interest in developing the southern part of James Island. I don't blame, land developers for going where there's still some convenient access back to the urban core of the peninsula. But we really cannot afford to have any more dense development in that part of James Island. And I would hope that you would seriously consider my request. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Jackson, again for your time and your work for the city. Next, I believe we have Katie Zimmerman. Is that correct, Chloe? And if so, Ms. Zimmerman, you go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hi, all. This is Katie Zimmerman, Executive Director of Charleston Moves. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to, first, thank you for all the work you've done on this draft. I've participated in comprehensive planning processes for City of Charleston and several other cities, and this one is definitely the most comprehensive so far. So it's pretty cool to see. I wanted to recommend 2 additions to the transportation element of the plan, and they're related to some things that have recently become a little more formalized discussions over the past few months. I think these things, if added to the plan, would help add more clarity and guidance to the complete streets support that's referenced in the city plan right now. Currently, how it's written, I think, is a little bit vague, and by adding these 2 things could make that support more actionable in the future, and also lay out some more expectations for different stakeholders under complete streets. The first would be, since, as we all know, the majority of the city's streets and bridges are owned and maintained by the state, but SCDOT in February officially passed their Complete Streets Engineering Directive, and that is starting to work its way through the entire agency down into local planning. They are updating all of their directives and guidance documents and guidelines related to all sorts of designing and implementation and maintenance that previously, the answer would be no when you went to DOT. Now the answer for the city of Charleston for a lot of things will probably be yes. So I think it would be helpful if the plan included reference to the Complete Streets Directive, which also outlines in that directive specifically that the BCD COG is the holder of all biking and walking plans, including the cities, and has combined them into one large tri-county plan that's ultimately going to get rolled up to the state level. So again, including reference to that directive would help anybody reading this plan understand how Complete Streets will be actionable in the future, and all the different entities that will have to be involved with that to assist the city in those goals. The second is, as part of the work by the city of Charleston to implement walking and biking paths, one of the things I think would be helpful, and you all actually touched on this at your last Planning Commission meeting, in order to implement paths, I think it would be great if the city plan could recommend the reassessment of zoning and development codes to determine appropriate requirements of contextual multi-use paths along corridors and streets. So there's places where they're appropriate, there's places where they aren't. I think, there are multi-use path guidelines right now included for 3 zoning overlays in the city. There are myriad locations throughout the city where multi-use paths would be vital aspects of development. But at the moment, since it's not codified, the city's boards, commissions, and technical committees don't really have a formalized ability to work with private entities and public entities to incorporate those paths. So I think a recommendation to develop some formalized code around that would be helpful, recognizing that this plan does not change code and zoning, but I think a recommendation to work on that could be great. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time and work.
And thank you, Ms. Zimmerman, for trying to make Charleston a little safer place. So we appreciate it. I
Thanks.
think next we have Susan Smythe, and Ms. Smythe, it's always good to have you. And whenever you're ready, you go ahead.
Well, I wanted to thank you for the time that all of you have devoted to this city plan. I wanted to, I'm Susan Smythe and I represent the owners of the Cainhoy development. I very much appreciate the time that the city has spent with us and addressing our concerns. Our primary concern had to do with the treatment of the property that's north of Clements Ferry Road, which is the highest land. And we have learned through good communication with the city that the city plan is not inconsistent with the development rights that were afforded to the Cainhoy owners in the 3 PUDs. And we very much appreciate the time that the city has spent helping us better understand the city plan. Thank you very much for your time. I just wanted to assure you that our concerns had been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smythe. That's the people that had signed up to speak. Chloe, I'm gonna ask you to read the written comments as well as read the letter from Historic Charleston for the record.
Of course. First comment is from Susan Lyons, 7 Gadsden Street. I'm delighted to see so much of the city plan taking water flooding concerns into account. With that in mind, a citywide water plan is a critical first step in the aggressive mitigation effort to preserve the neighborhoods, homes, historic places, and vistas from catastrophic flooding from all causes. The Dutch Dialogues report first recommended a water plan as an organizing document, and the new 3x3 Advisory Committee has voted unanimously to recommend that City Council take up a water plan on an urgent basis. As a member of the 3x3 Committee and on behalf of Groundswell, I encourage the Planning Commission to include a comprehensive water plan as a top recommendation in the plan's resilience chapter. Second is from Kyle H., 20 Carolina Street. The city plan should incorporate the state's complete streets directive. The city should require any construction to accommodate all modes of transportation, including pedestrians and bikes. I live near a dangerous stretch of King Street that has been made more dangerous for pedestrians the last year due to construction at King and Shepherd Streets blocking the sidewalk. From Christine Magnarella Ray, 1508 Swamp Fox Lane. I support for prioritizing and investing in safe, connected, equitable, and accessible multimodal transportation throughout the city. From Lewis Payne at 1600 Long Grove Boulevard in Mount Pleasant. I just finished a week living in a condominium downtown Charleston and spending the time walking around and or dining with folks all over town. I could not find even one person that was a resident. They were all tourists other than local employees. Downtown is like Disney, but with 25% of the shops and restaurants shut down. Most people complain to me about the inability to get a reservation even in lower end restaurants. In my opinion, Charleston has become more of a tourist trap than a place to live. Several of the couples that I spoke with told me that they were spending 3 days in Charleston and then on to Orlando for 7 days. We must manage tourism, maintain the historical integrity of the city, and save it from drowning. From Lynn Hanlon, 67 Meeting Street. I want to suggest 3 items for inclusion in the comprehensive plan. 1, a comprehensive plan for tourism management. This is a must in a city that is overrun with tourists. 2, creation of an Office of Economic Development, and 3, creation of more public green spaces. And finally, from Keshen Durley with Historic Charleston Foundation. Dear Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission, on behalf of Historic Charleston Foundation, thank you and the city planning staff for your ongoing work on the Charleston City Plan and extensive public engagement process. You and the staff should be commended for an excellent work product. The commitment in the city plan to the recommendations of the Dutch Dialogues report, affordable housing, and maintaining Charleston's historic and cultural resources is highly commendable. In particular, we would like to recognize the city for the care and attention paid to documentation of African American settlement communities. The plan reflects many of the recommendations that HCF has made throughout the process, and HCF is supportive of the city plan. However, there are a few areas where we feel some additions and/or improvements can be made. Those comments can be found below. Please let me know if I can answer any questions or be of assistance. We look forward to continued collaboration on the city plan. The comments include on natural resources. It is critical that the city plan recommend development of a citywide water plan as recommended in the Dutch Dialogues Charleston final report. This water plan should provide a comprehensive assessment of flood risk, storage, infiltration, and drainage performance and set forth water assignments per drainage basement. Further, the water plan should identify preferred land use strategies needed to achieve water assignments and should also make a groundwater assessment. Continue to encourage and research ways to incentivize the adoption of conservation easements. For cultural resources, a new historic resources survey should be conducted for the Upper Peninsula north of Line Street to help guide preservation policy in this rapidly changing area of the city. This could be incorporated into recommendation number 9. The city plan should recommend adoption of an archaeological ordinance and prioritize areas of the city where archaeology would be required before development or redevelopment of a site could be commenced, such as the areas of the peninsula and the Ashley River Historic District. Recommendation number 7 should also recommend increasing the number of monuments and markers dedicated to other underrepresented groups as well, such as Jewish history and women's history. In 2017, HCF began an historic marker and monument survey on the Charleston Peninsula, north to Hampton Park, to determine which areas of our shared history deserve more attention. To date, we have identified 129 markers, plaques, monuments, statues, busts, and objects, and we would be happy to share that information with the city. For economic development, establish a collaboration between the Neighborhood and Business Services Department and the Charleston LDC on economic development opportunities to accomplish shared goals and avoid a duplication of services. Recommend development of a destination stewardship model for tourism management through which the community, the city, local nonprofits, and the tourism industry take a multi-stakeholder approach to maintaining the tourism economy. This model has been successfully adopted and tested in many cities in Europe. And recommend an update to the 2015 Tourism Management Plan. For housing, research avenues and funding sources for protecting private subsidized housing nearing the end of its affordability term, and promote scaling up new affordable housing projects through innovative public-private partnerships and take full advantage of the Palmetto Community Land Trust, and recommend that the city bank any feasible surplus city lands for future housing opportunities. And finally, for land use, research ways to assist property owners with flood adaptation, particularly in rapidly gentrifying areas.
Thank you, Chloe, for reading those off. That'll close the public aspect of this public hearing. Before we get to commission members' questions and comments, I'd like Mr. Morgan to ask if he'd like to address any of the issues. Several of them was noted several times, like creating an Office of Tourism Management, Economic Development. Would you like to address, there was a lot of issues. I'm not asking you to address them all, but if there's some you'd like to go through and maybe there's some quick answers to.
Yeah, I guess on the tourism management, this plan is kind of a 30,000 foot plan, as we've talked about many times. And, that's not to say that maybe we don't need to do some update of the tourism management plan and all that. That is more detail oriented than we can get into in this document. But if the planning commission wanted to say something in one of our sections about recommending an update to the tourism management plan, by all means, add that to the recommendations. We're happy to do that. Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to address? I know there was, again, I'm not asking to address them all, but Councilmember Jackson, there were several things. I don't know if there's anything, if you don't want to touch on anything, that's fine too. We'll go into commission members' questions or comments.
I'm happy to discuss any of the comments that
we'll see if I have commission members, they may bring something up that has a question. So I'd ask commission members, comments, questions, motions. Just let me know. I know you're standing in line to speak. Ms. Jacobs, go ahead. Thank you.
Well, you brought that up, Charlie, really was my initial question. Some of these recommendations are quite specific, and I just wondered how we go about them. Do we look at them one by one and say yes, no, or do we look at them one by one and say they're sort of already addressed? These are the public comments of things that they would like for us to consider. And you brought up the question about how do we just walk down the line and look at them? That would be one of my first questions before I went into some things that I had, was how do we address these public comments?
Well, again, in my opinion, if somebody wanted, we're going to send a plan to city council. If someone wanted to make a motion, commission member wanted to make a motion to add or change something, you certainly have the right to do that. Whether you recommend we add a statement in there, or we think we ought to look at those committees, economic development, tourism management, whatever, that's your right to do that, and we pass on to city council. It would have to be passed by these commission members first. Other commission members?
Mr. Lasane has his.
Harry, Mr. Lasane, you go ahead.
Sure, yeah, and I'm responding to a number of the comments. I would like us to discuss. I believe we owe Councilmember Jackson the courtesy of at least airing her concern about the urban growth boundary on James Island. So maybe Christopher, I'll put you on the spot, but you and I have discussed this many times over the years. So if you could sort of explain the city's position on this, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Lasane. Good question.
Probably be good to go to share screen. So let me go back to the share screen and find my right share screen. All right. Can you all see the plan in here, right?
Yes, sir.
Let's go back. So this is the area in question here. This is the current urban growth boundary kind of wraps around all of this and has it outside the UGB. And there's been a big phrase talked about a lot over the last few years about strengthening the UGB.
Christopher, could you give a couple of landmarks just to help?
Absolutely. So this is Ocean Neighbors development that's here. This is Grimble Road that's right here. This is trying to think of another landmark. The Signal Point Industrial Park is here, and that's already inside the UGB, and that's in purple here, or bluish color here. Is that helping you orient yourself?
It is for me.
Okay, so like the new library in the county built is right over here. The James Island Elementary is here, and both of those are outside the UGB, even as we have proposed here. And of course, the county, all of this is inside the UGB. Everything here is inside the UGB and the county's UGB. But when the UGB was first written, it had Ocean Neighbors outside it. And as Ms. Jackson noted, that's all built out, and, there won't be other changes there. And then the Spyglass development, which is here, is a multifamily apartment development. In our opinion, we strengthen the UGB by making areas that are outside of it, match rural densities. So our zoning is much more consistent with the line being on the western side of Folly Road, because Folly Road has the Folly Road overlay that allows densities of 8 to 12 units an acre, which is clearly very urban. And that's both county densities and that is city densities, because not all of this is in the city. So we thought that for consistency's sake, to strengthen the UGB, it made sense to move it to the outside edge of the Folly Road overlay. We understand the concern about African-American settlement areas in here along Old Grimble, and a lot of that has not been annexed, and council, can choose to not annex any of that. It's not like we are hearing from a lot of people over there who want to annex at present. That has not at all been part of this effort to clean up this UGB line. It's just been to make the UGB line as consistent with the zoning that we have in place as possible. We definitely agree with her comments about keeping this area, with low density development, and that can be done whether it's inside or outside the UGB. But we do have a lot of very suburban or urban zoning with this Folly Road overlay, and we hated for that to be inconsistent and outside the UGB with those types of densities.
Christopher, just as a follow-up question to what you were talking about with the UGB, the African American settlement area hasn't been mapped. I read when I was reading through the comprehensive plan, I saw that Councilwoman Johnson participated in some of that process, and arguably some of this area would be where that settlement is located, is in that county district that she represents. And
Correct.
so in that collaborative effort, did she have any commentary about the UGB line as well? Because she actually lives right within that UGB line.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, she lives right there, and that's family land that she has in that area as well. So, does she have any comments about the urbanization of that area and concerns about that?
So I think she was a little bit confused in our discussions. I should point out that all of this is inside the UGB and the county's plan. So she was kind of confused that we had it even outside the UGB, because she's like, well, it's inside the UGB. Well, that's not the case in the city. It's outside. And we've always felt very strongly that the areas along the main part of Grimble Road exhibited very rural characteristics. We worked very hard to make sure all this land that's over here, the Grimble Farms PUD was very low density. This is a PUD that's all 1 unit an acre, and felt that was very important to keep that area rural and that character of the rural nature over there, and Saul agree rural and all that. But she was actually talking about Saul agree should be more urban and things like that. And that's an area that we've never really felt that way about. I think she had more comments in the time we were talking to her, and Chloe might chime in on this, about her interest in the potential boundary lines or names of settlement areas in this area, which still needs a whole lot more research, because there's a whole lot of different opinion about where settlement areas are over there and which ones have what names. So that was the bulk of what my recollection was her discussion.
Does that answer your question?
So she didn't have any real comments. So she seemingly, so in shifting the boundary line of the UGB, she either wanted it to be more expansive or to be more expansive. That's kind of what I was gathering?
Really directly comment on that. She was more commenting on the settlement areas boundaries, but then she did make the comment about Saul agree, maybe being more urban and things like that, which, that's an area we haven't annexed any in, and it's a rural community. And, I don't anticipate that we would be annexing that in that area.
All right, other comments, commission members?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll jump back in. Given that explanation, Christopher, which I think is well reasoned, that essentially, we've got some suburban style development that's currently outside the boundary. Let's make the boundary mean something on James Island. And I mean, the whole point of this city plan is as a planning tool for us to use, citizens to use who are considering development on their property. So perhaps there's a section, a short section added to the plan that explains that, and for the settlement area and other settlement areas, discusses, and I know that the plan does talk about the settlement areas and that there's more study needed, and that's been mentioned many times. But I think the point you're trying to make there, Christopher, is just because we adjust this urban growth boundary doesn't mean we're unleashing development in any particular area. We have multiple areas within the city inside the urban growth boundary that we say, we don't think should be intensively developed. So I don't think that's not what this commission would be saying if we adjusted this boundary the way that's been suggested. And I think, as Christopher said, this is the 10,000 foot plan. As we get granular with the planning, and if there are zoning changes recommended, that's when you go in there and finally consider each parcel and the specific character of those parcels and so forth. So that your explanation for me explains the position, and I think it's well reasoned.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Mr. Bailey, did you have a comment or question?
Well, it was really back to Ms. Jacobs' question about how do we deal with the comments that we have received both in writing and folks that have spoken tonight. And that's a good question. I don't have an answer, but maybe a suggestion, and that is that you know, I don't know how long we've been at this, but there's been a lot of engagement over the past number of months, and you know, a lot of the comments that people have made along the way have made it into the plan. Some haven't. But at some point you have to stop drafting, and we have to send something to City Council for their consideration. But that said, I mean, we had 5 or 6 people who took time to come to potentially the very last time we'll see this, and another handful that wrote letters, thoughtful letters, including a really detailed one from the Historic Charleston Foundation that, you know, we didn't get until this afternoon. I just ask that maybe if we do approve a draft plan tonight, that in whatever the transmittal is that goes to City Council, that it include a copy of tonight's comments that were made by people who spoke and folks who wrote in. And I suspect some of those same folks will speak at City Council too. But if they took the time tonight, then I would like to see those comments forwarded on.
I agree, Mr. Bailey, but I will say that if anybody had a particular issue or comment or change that they would like to make, we certainly could make a motion to send the plan to City Council with the addition or the recommendation or whatever in addition. So again, we can send it with the comments, and I think that's good that we do that, and we should. But if there's any specifically we'd like to change to send to City Council, we can do that as well tonight.
And could I make one? I should have made a scheduling comment.
Go ahead, Mr. Morgan.
Just a reminder that we are planning to schedule a joint Planning Commission City Council workshop so that you all have the opportunity to talk to City Council members. It's in all likelihood going to be a Zoom workshop, but you all would have the opportunity to talk to City Council members about various aspects of the plan, have more discussion. You know, I would think before we have that workshop, we'd want to have y'all's recommendations on the plan, but that would be another time to talk about some of the things that you all have heard. Tentatively right now, if there were a recommendation from you all for approval tonight, that workshop would probably be coming on June 30th. That's when we're hearing from the Clerk of Council that they have availability. You know, obviously that is still tentative. The date could shift, but if you all were to endorse it tonight, it would go on to City Council on July 21st. So we would be having that meeting at some point, hopefully the 30th, but it might be a little bit later than that.
And as you said, when it goes to City Council, there'll be several readings and citizen participation periods. But again, if anybody had anything specific, the way I read it is we can make the recommendation, send it to City Council with the addition or change or whatever. So Ms. Jacobs, you go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had actually discussed this with Christopher earlier and had been thinking about this. This has been a lot of work. It's got some very progressive ideas in it. I think some very important ideas with it. We're obviously having a very dynamic discussion tonight. I have a few specific things that I would like to discuss, but I think in order to, if tonight we choose to move it forward to council, you, Mr. Chairman, should maybe draft a cover letter that just talks about some of the highlights, like we've talked tonight about no growth, urban growth boundary, our guiding principles, maybe some key recommendations that we think are really thoughtful, and that we should sort of give the council the benefit of our work in a cover letter so that they can sort of go into the plan and say, where else they find things that are important, maybe on their constituent response. But I really think we should do that for council, give them the benefit of that, as Mr. Bailey suggested, with these specific comments, because right now I'm still digesting some of these specific comments. I don't know how I necessarily feel about adding them or making a motion to add them tonight. But I would like to say that the some of my comments with regard to the different elements, I know Ms. Zimmerman from Charleston Moves reflected some things that I also concur with, that I would like to, I don't know right now if we could agree on language. Maybe it's a time to look at the comments and come back with some language with respect to these, but I definitely feel strongly about the things that she said with regard to the tourism management idea. There was a recommendation in here about, you know, the STRs in the housing. And I think the recommendation might need to be expanded to kind of review that ordinance periodically to see if it has any impact on housing stock. There's a management tourism and a management housing stock thing together. Under the recommendations in land use, we talk about the African American settlement communities as considered a land use tool. And we talk extensively under the cultural resources about this, but we don't mention it at all under the land use recommendations. So I think that somehow should be incorporated, you know, so that if somebody's focused at land use recommendations, they don't see all those recommendations under cultural resources that are an important aspect to put into the land use recommendations. I also agree that we need to add a recommendation to review the feasibility of the archaeological ordinance, especially on all the work with the African American settlement communities and the cemeteries and just many other aspects of this. I think that needs to be added as a recommendation and not just spoken about within the plan. We talk about reviewing the tree protection ordinance, but I also think we might want to actually look at our landscape ordinance with regard to buffers and wetland buffers with all the new progressive work that is out there about creating these buffers and management of stormwater. I think that should be looked at with regard to natural resources. And under the community engagement process and engagement part, I went through and staff did an excellent job at the very beginning reviewing our strengths and weaknesses of our Century 5 plan. And during this engagement process, the city asked for timelines. And so we looked in the weaknesses that the goals were too general. I know that we can't sit here and say, okay, next week, next Tuesday, we're going to start working on recommendation 2A under land resources. But I think the community wants to have some sense of this plan of how you timeline this out. Plan West actually did an excellent job of this. They took all the recommendations and put them into an implementation matrix and said how much money it would cost, you know, just by a dollar icon, whether it was a multi-jurisdictional problem, whether this was a short-term or a medium-term or long-term goal. And they gave some references to that. And I think the community might benefit from that. I don't know whether we can immediately incorporate that into the plan, but I think it should be a recommendation that we create some kind of expectation about how we're going to immediately dig in and address this plan. That was asked for at several levels during community engagement. Those hit my highlights that I have. I had some recommendations for a graphic. One was a graphic out of the 2/5/21 blog that was used on the city plan that just, it was a word graphic to see how often words came up with the community and created importance with regard to the city plan. I think that could be a nice graphic addition to the community empowerment. And then we focus a lot in transportation about multimodal and pedestrian and bicycle work, but we don't have a single graphic in there that shows any bicycle route or pedestrian route in the city. And I've seen several others. There's one specifically in the city transportation plan on page 40 called the existing bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure map. I know Ms. Zimmerman referenced the work of the COG. That's probably a major edit to the plan, but we should at least have a really nice box that references this, because to talk about integrating and connectivity and pedestrian and bike safety and not show a graphic with respect to that, I think sort of sends a little bit of a wrong message. So those are some of my overview thoughts. I think that if we do choose to move it forward, we should move it forward with this letter. So it would maybe require us coming back as a body to review what that letter and the specific additions would mean to the plan for council to meet with us in the workshop, and then move it forward into the council approval process and the continued public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Donna. Ms. Jacobs, I tell you, so several ways we can handle this tonight. We can approve it, obviously, or we can approve it with me doing a letter, which I would send all to y'all, a draft of the recommendations we see, or somebody can make a specific recommendation to add to the plan. So again, there's several ways to do it, but I think what Christopher, and if you want to address anything Ms. Jacobs commented, you can, but I think we need to move forward, put brakes on review, or say we want to move it forward with specific recommendations. Comments, Harry?
Well, I don't want to jump in. I know I've spoken a lot. If there are any other commission members who have comments, I have some comments that I'd like to follow up the chairman's comments, but I don't want to. I know there are a couple of folks who haven't spoken at all, so I'd like to give them the opportunity to speak first.
Anybody would like to speak? Please do. If not, Harry, I'm gonna put the ball back in.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Ms. Bryant Jenkins has her hand raised.
Yeah, Ms. Bryant Jenkins, you go ahead.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to point out some things that Ms. Jacobs has already mentioned, and some things that some of our speakers have, guest speakers' comments have come through today. And it's in reference to the Preservation Society recommendation to number 7 about the monuments. I think that's something that I would definitely like for us to maybe talk about a little bit more in detail in how we will be moving forward on that. And in reference to Ms. Katie Zimmerman's position on transportation, definitely that is something I would like to talk about a little more, like Ms. Jacobs, being new at this process. Those are things that I would like us to maybe have more of a discussion on. And I know right now, Mr. Chairman, you are looking for us to make a motion of some sort. And
well,
if I can,
go ahead. I'm sorry. You go ahead.
But those are just a couple of things. And I have more concerns as well, but I'm in agreement with Ms. Jacobs as far as how do we move forward in getting this addressed, and maybe talked about in a little bit more detail as to how we're going to incorporate this in the plan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. And I just don't want to motion, believe me, I don't want a motion just to have a motion. I want a motion if we're ready for motion. If we're not ready. That's all. Mr. Lassane?
Yeah, and I just kind of want to echo what the chairman has said, and that is, if there are concerns, now's the time to talk about them. You know, if I were a member of city council and the planning commission of the city of Charleston sent me the 10-year planning document and said, we really like this, but there are a few things that we don't really like about it or we want changed, I'd be like, well, why'd you send it to me? I think we need to be comfortable with the document we send. We're in session now, and perhaps, you know, it's the commission's will, but now's the time. Let's talk about them. I mean, let's start making a list and make some specific recommendations, and let's go for it.
I agree. So if somebody says, I think if someone says, we want to add this or this, let's do it. Let's do it. I'm sorry.
I have one.
Ms. Harrison, you go ahead.
Thank you. I do have a recommendation because I know, so sometimes we have a tendency to talk about subjects, but talk around them sometimes. And it, you know, it just kind of, it happens in all settings. With respect to the settlement communities and our equity portion, we're talking about monuments, we're talking about protecting those communities, but what we have, and we talk about affordable housing, but what we haven't talked about is how do we and I said this at the beginning of 2020, is that the population of African Americans in the city of Charleston has dropped year over year. And so what are we doing to specifically address drawing that community back in? Because part of the reason why they've left is because of the cost burden of housing. So we're talking about cost burden of housing, but we're not talking about who we're talking about. And so if the idea is that we want to have affordable housing, we want to make it more equitable, we want to have all these expressions about cultural resources, well, people are a resource. And so drawing families back to Charleston, I think, is extremely important. Ms. Bryant lives downtown, I live downtown. One thing that I've noticed is that it is very rare for me to see people move downtown that are African American and buying homes, and that's something to me that is just missing in this part of the plan, even though we're talking about it, but we're not really saying it.
So I'm not trying to cut you off, but how would you make a recommendation? What recommendation would you have in regard to that? I agree with you, but I'm just trying to think of, again, so it's concrete.
Saying that we need to look at our policies for affordable housing and addressing how we're going to either preserve heirs property or how we're going to work with other community organizations on those pieces, because it's not necessarily we want affordable housing, but even attracting professionals back downtown, because there needs to be a sense of community. and I think we need to just either address that in the housing piece, or we need to address that in the land use piece. Because that is the whole reason, that is what Christopher Morgan pointed out, which is you have these areas that were created because of zoning, but now through gentrification, through, the cost burden of housing, those populations have decreased significantly.
So would you say that the city look at the policy for affording housing, but also how to attract more diversity? Maybe attract more diversity of the people that are living in the city of Charleston. I don't want to say just downtown. I want to say the whole city. I don't think
Right.
So is that a recommendation?
I think we should say like Black-owned businesses or something to that effect, minority-based businesses.
Well, tell me exactly how, again, I'm not trying, but tell me how, so it's concrete. I know it's tough to put you on the spot, but think about how you would word that so that we put it as, that we can discuss it. I mean, I agree with the policy of affordable housing, look at them, how to attract more diversity in the city or equality of diversity or whatever.
We need to say something about, I think in saying that, number one, we're talking about attracting, Black-owned businesses back to downtown, or elevating those businesses. The second would be attracting jobs and encouraging diversity of jobs, and then really utilizing, those tax incentives and tax benefits that we have for, what is it? It is escaping me right now. The opportunity zones, and looking at where those can be utilized to attract jobs, and as well as training centers, so that we can increase minority participation in downtown, or not downtown, but in the peninsula.
All right, and Chloe, I'd ask you to and Christopher to make notes of these. So if I worded it in such a way, or you were comfortable with, we looked at the policy for affordable housing and how to attract diversity to include Black-owned businesses and professionals into the city of Charleston. Would you feel comfortable with that? I mean, I'm just trying to get it so it's worded.
I feel comfortable. Yeah, and we can look at some language. Yes, that would be the start of the recommendation.
Okay. Other comments on that specific? I mean, I'm for that. I mean, I've said many times, I think we're losing the diversity of the city of Charleston. I talk about all the time whenever a Black church moves out of the city. I always email Christopher and say, why is this church leaving? It's changed the way the city looks. But anyway, Are people comfortable with that?
Christopher, Charlie, may I
Yes, ma'am.
comment?
You go ahead.
With what Erica said, I think that we need to really endorse and come up with specific policy changes, because I think that's what I was talking about earlier. It's vague. We've been talking about affordable housing now for many years, and even workforce housing. Blacks, whites, I mean, nobody can afford to live in downtown Charleston anymore. And unless we change the policy, we look at land and rezone it specifically for affordable housing or for workforce affordable housing, and make the process easier, we're never going to get there. We can talk about it all day long, but we need to endorse policy changes, and we need to come up with areas and zoning changes that needs to happen. And I think that, and this is a plan, and this is a 30-foot view of it, but I don't know how specific we want to get in this.
Well, I don't think we can be that specific in this 30,000-foot plan, because I think it has to be general. I think to say that we're concerned about that and the city needs to address it, it's mentioned it. I don't think we can make this. I don't have the professionalism or the background to say how to address it. I think that's to the staff or the professionals to do, but we're saying what the concerns are. Can someone help me here or tell me your thoughts? I always look at
Mr. Chairman, if
Yes,
I
ma'am.
could just mention that a year ago, we published the Housing for a Fair Charleston report, which has over 100 very specific recommendations and an implementation matrix with priorities and timelines. And so we've incorporated many of those recommendations. We've built off of those, but also we didn't want to copy and paste over 100 recommendations for housing in the city plan for obvious reasons. So we have, it may be a cop out, but we did put a recommendation in there to continue to implement all recommendations in the Housing for Fair Charleston report as a sort of catch-all, just acknowledging that there are many more that are referenced there that we have been actively worked on. We need to continue to actively work on, but those are much more specific, and that will be included in the appendix and adopted as part of this plan.
Thank you, Chloe, but I don't know if that addresses the way that Ms. Harrison wanted the area of diversity or Black-owned businesses, those kind of things. And I was just trying to think we certainly could say we'd like more focus to be on those housing recommendations that are listed. But any other comments on this, specifically about what Ms. Harrison brought up? I'm just trying to get to what we want to put in so that we're kind of, as Harry said, now's the time to do it. I think we're in session. We're discussing it. If you have a certain thing you want to bring up, let's bring it up and talk about it, see whether we want to include it or not include it. So I think.
I
Yes.
don't know if you can hear me. I have terrible.
Yeah, Ms. Johnson, I hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. But I can hear everything. I know my audio is bad. I'm in agreement with everything we discussed. I think the intent is great. I think everything that has been brought up has a lot of merit, but I'm kind of with Charlie. I don't understand how we can implement this in a matter of the next hour in terms of recommendations and really nailing down what the concerns are and what we would like to see. I almost feel that would need a whole nother work session. I hate to say that. But I just don't see any scenario where we can encompass everything that was discussed into our recommendations, although I think we should.
I agree. And maybe it is that we send recommendations and we meet again next week, and say, we want to get this right. I think Harry's right. It's our chance to get it right. If we're going to spend a lot of time and just say we're going to send what staff is there, but we have concerns, let's address the concerns. Let's talk about them. Let's include them and let city council just make the decision.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Ms. Johnson in the sense that, I had written out draft my thoughts, but it's not in good recommendation verbiage speak to be included in the plan. It's just an idea for almost under every section, either enhancing a recommendation or adding a few extra words to to a recommendation. And I think that maybe we would benefit from each one of us, sending that document, to staff to compile it. And then that way we would get it back to, everybody's individual ideas to refine into what we want to add to the plan before we send it to council. Even then, I think we ought to send a cover letter just to sort of, explaining what we've done. Because I have, page under title recommendation this with some additional work to it. But for me, that would be hard if somebody else gave me that information to digest it at the recommendation level to vote on it tonight. I think we need a synthesis of everybody's ideas into a written document back to us to be able to spend some time and process it at the same level that we've spent time processing the whole 150 pages of the plan.
I think you're right, Ms. Jacobs, and I can promise you, whatever you put down, I'm gonna have to read 3 times before I figure it out. I promise you. So it's important. It's important, and what you say is important, and maybe we should all make a commitment to say by the end of this week or by Monday morning or whatever, we have our written comments down. Gives us several days and over the weekend to do it so that we get this right and we really do take our time and feel like we've really given us 150%. So.
Well, in a suggestion.
Go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
If I can make a suggestion, I think that's a great idea, but it would be great, Chloe, if you could set up some kind of shared document or something where we could kind of put all our thoughts together and comment on it. Donna may think of something that I want to comment on rather than sending individual emails. Can you put together some kind of a shared spreadsheet or a shared note that we can kind of insert our comments into?
In the Dropbox, that would be a great idea, Ms. Johnson.
I think we may need to be a little bit careful about, how much discussion goes on outside of the public realm, because
thank you, Christopher.
We are a public body. So I think it's fine if individual planning commissioners have things that they would like to have addressed, and we could compile a list if you all wanted to send a list, and then that list could become a public document. What I think I hear you saying is you'd like a little bit more time to, work on this. That's fine. What I might suggest is that we reconvene this meeting, have a final discussion on the plan. And I'm thinking maybe we schedule it for 2 weeks out for the 23rd so we can properly public notice it. And if that date works for folks, I mean, we can certainly look at other dates too, but I'm just throwing that out because that's at least a week before that possible joint meeting with the city council. And then the focus on that meeting could be, it sounds like most of the thought I'm hearing from you all tonight is on the actual recommendations themselves. So we could resend the recommendations in one document to you all, the full list of the recommendations, let y'all review those and highlight if there's some others, you send that to us individually, and then we send it to the whole group and make publicly available what you all have suggested as some potential other recommendations. And then you all discuss those at another meeting on possibly the 23rd or a different date if the 23rd is not a good date.
Christopher, I think that's good because I would ask people to maybe do it several days. We'd say the deadline for giving you recommendations is maybe next week, the end of next week, so that, because otherwise people wait, and I do this, I wait till the last day. So I'd rather we get them as far ahead of time as we can to y'all compile them. We come back, because the way I see it is we have specific recommendations. We either as a group support a recommendation or don't. If we support it, then it goes into the plan recommendation. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. But again, it's a commission's recommendation, so we need to have some agreement on that. How does that sound to folks? Mr. Bailey?
That sounds good. And I really like the idea of having a deadline in advance of when we're going to get together, and would just add that if someone feels strongly that there needs to be a very specific addition, that that the specific language is proposed and submitted to staff, so that that's what we are studying in advance of the next meeting. But I did want, and so, I'll definitely support deferring a decision, but I didn't want to let my time to speak pass without saying this, and I should have said it at the beginning. The plan is fantastic, and the staff deserves so much credit for putting this thing together. And maybe I got a little ahead of myself trying to just advance something tonight, but by no means, when I support gathering again in 2 weeks, does it mean that I think that this isn't already a great plan. And so I do like the idea of letting people digest it a little bit more, though.
Why don't we say that there's a deadline of the middle of next week, gives everybody 7 days, or the end of next week, 9 days, and that we meet, if that works for everybody. Mr. Christopher, you go ahead.
Encourage it to be middle of next week so that then we can give it to you all and also publish it to the public, because I think we would need to put on our website what y'all are suggesting as potential additional recommendations so the public has time to see them too.
Okay, that makes sense. So maybe 1 week from today is a deadline, gives everybody 7 days.
And what we as staff will do, we will send to you all within 2 days, definitely by Friday, the entire list, just so it's in one place, the entire list of all the recommendations. So you've got them in one place. Of course, you've also got the full document too, but just those in one place. So if you want to do some edit or whatever, and you'll have that too. And
thank you. But as Mr. Bailey said, please make it, if you can. I know it's tough, the wording, and Ms. Jacobs and Ms. Harrison, I just talked about just this issue, this one issue of Black-owned businesses and diversity. Make it as specific as you can so that we're ready to discuss the recommendation when we meet.
Okay. And just because logistics do drive some of this, am I getting concurrence that you all are available, let's say at 5 o'clock on the 23rd, to have another Zoom meeting like this to finalize?
At this point.
Yes.
Am I getting thumbs up? We're getting thumbs up.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yes, sounds great.
Harry, are you good then?
You're on mute. You're on mute, Harry.
Oh, sorry. I just said potentially I could be out of town, but I perhaps could participate from.
Okay. So to make it official, can we get a motion that we defer this until we have for 2 weeks so that we can have specific recommendations to discuss and vote on the 23rd? Is there so motion?
I would so move, Mr. Chairman, if we need to have that motion.
Yeah.
Well, I think it'd be
Do we
appropriate.
need a motion if there's been no motion to advance it?
Okay, I mean, I just think when we've got a topic that's on the agenda, and I think we need to say, we just in my opinion, I may be wrong, that we plan a meeting in 2 weeks to finalize the plan with further recommendations. Ms. Jacobs so made a motion. Harry, you okay with the second? If not,
yeah, I'll second that, and I'll take the opportunity. And I support what everybody said about being specific. So that we can have some language. And if you need help with drafting the language, that's why we have staff to work with them to help put into specific words what you're asking for. And I think this is the right move. If the commission's not comfortable, we need to be comfortable with the document before we send it to city council. If it takes more time, it takes more time. It's important that we get it right. And I do think, actually, as I thought about it, having a public hearing and then approving something immediately after the public hearing, something of this magnitude perhaps was a little unrealistic. So I think this is the right move, and I would just encourage everybody to be specific about language and location in the plan too. So I second.
Thank you, and I agree. It's that important. Donna?
Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure, since we've been talking about our own recommendations, I don't want us to gloss over Mr. Bailey's recommendation about incorporating these comments from the public into that discussion somehow, that the recommendations that were made from the public can be integrated into the document that we look at, and some notation that this was a public recommendation that we can say yay or nay about.
I think that could be a recommendation as well. That could be a recommendation as well, that we pass it these are important that we maybe, we considered them, but we want to pass them on to city council as well. So I agree with that. Is there any other discussion? If not, I'm going to do a roll call vote just on the motion. Mr. Bailey?
I in favor.
Thank you. Ms. Bryant Jenkins?
I in favor.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Harrison?
You're on mute.
Oh, I think we can't hear you. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So I am favor, and as I was saying, I did not mean to upset the apple cart and not have us go forward when you were looking for specific recommendations.
No. And you know what? We need to get it right. So I appreciate your comments and I agree with you. So thank you. Ms. Jacobs?
I in favor.
Thank Ms. Johnson.
You're on mute.
Maybe muted as well, Ms. Johnson.
You're muted.
We can't hear you. Oh, good. I see you. So you're okay. Thank you. Ms. Lepsis?
I in favor.
Thank you. Mr. Lassane?
I in favor.
8, and I'm in favor. So that's 8 in favor and not opposed that we reconvene in 2 weeks, but we have specific recommendations to staff 7 days from today. And I appreciate everybody. I think as Mr. Lassane said, Mr. Bailey, it's that important we get this thing right. So thank you, everyone. And if there's no other comments, I appreciate everybody's time and we'll stand adjourned.
I think Mr. Bailey had a comment.
Oh, Mr. Bailey, you go ahead.
I was just going to ask staff if there's been any progress. I know some surveys have been going around about meeting in person.
Yes, there are logistical things that we've got to work out because we are still probably going to have a hybrid meeting, hybrid meetings. So we are looking at August or September for the beginning of mostly in person, but some options for remote. We have some equipment that has to be procured because our meeting room doesn't have cameras in it at present. And we also need more displays so that if we have it in a Zoom type format, we can have that there. So our IT folks need till probably late August to get that worked out.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. And again, if there's nothing else, we'll stand adjourned for tonight. And thank you for your time on this.
Okay. Thank you all. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
on the 16th for your regular meeting. It's going to be a busy month.